Welcome to Mind Shifters Radio. Today is Wednesday, May the 14th, and we get to enter into this conversation once again about these awesome first century Aramaic tools and the physics behind them. To me, that is one of the most important pieces to this puzzle is recognizing that there is only one thing to talk about. I think it was Winston Churchill that said, "We have the pleasure of being separated by a common language." So we hear the physicist talking about this thing called energy. We hear the theologian talking about this thing called God. We hear the psychiatrist or the psychologist talking about this thing called the unconscious. And in the last analysis, every one of them is talking about the same thing because it's the only thing to talk about. But if our minds, carbon based memory, separates those things out because of a differentiation of words, then truth is lost. And ultimately, one of the things that has to happen in order for true healing to occur, in order to introduce the truth of who we are as beings created literally from the energy called love, in order to bring that forward, because that is a subtle energy, a quiet energy. There is so much noise in the mind of lies, in the mind of hostility, of fear, of denial, of dissociation, of projection, of how the story's always about somebody else and how they need to change in order for me to reclaim my wholeness. And so, a couple of thoughts I want to add. I went on yesterday from the show and I did a little more looking into David Bohm's work as a physicist. And we ended yesterday speaking of the five smooth stones of David, the higher faculties that literally take apart Goliath, Goliath being the non being mind. Many people, when they start to wake up and go, oh, my mind is filled with rage and guilt and grief and pain, generations and generations of it. How will I ever overcome it? I'll never be able to do that. If that story runs you, of course, you're right. You'll never be able to do it. And so the objective of these tools is to offer you the methodology by which to weaken the voice of that monster Goliath, and through the five smooth stones, the five higher faculties of David, to bring in truth. In order for actual healing to occur, actual truth needs to be present. And the mind has got a million stories. There are a million stories in the Macon City. Well, the mind is loaded with stories. And those stories never allow a space of quietness. You'll remember that Yeshua said, go into the closet and close the door. You've got to go to that quiet space. You can't do it living in the noise of the mind. And we need to move out of the pain-based, the hostility and fear-based, carbon-based memory dynamics of the past. I mean, we literally have to move out of those in order to bring about something other than what we talked about yesterday of David Bohm's of sustained incoherence. So here's one of the things that Bohm said that really struck me, and it just ties right back into the ancient Aramaic and what was being taught then that's been interpreted as religion, but it's nothing to do with religion. So Bohm says, and there's several interviews on YouTube. If all of this conversation is making sense to you, I suggest go and listen. Look up some David Bohm, Bohm, lectures. He worked with a man named Krishnamurti, and worked with Carl Pribram at Stanford University. I mean, the man was a giant. But here's one of the things he offered. if we have a coherent approach to reality, now our language is going to vary a little bit here, so I'm going to adapt his words to what we're speaking of. He did not have the refinement of the difference between reality and actuality. At least he didn't language it as we are. So, you know, 2 of us, 10 of us, 100 of us, 10,000 people stand around an event and watch it. And 10,000 different realities occurred. Every mind from its carbon-based memory will serve up a reality, a construct. Remember from the Course in Miracles, that construct is called perception, and it's always false. In fact, Yeshua spoke to that perceptual mind, and when we are following what the perceptual mind leads us into, when we're following what carbon-based memory does, we're following the past, pretending to be the present. It's all based in a lie. So what did Yeshua say? To those who were doing that, he said, your father is the father of liars. There is no truth in him. If we are stuck in carbon-based memory, obviously content had to be there in order for the mind to use it and serve that content up. So what's stored in the memory bank is past. Massaged and modified and rearranged by goals, it shows up as a present in the mind, but the past can never be the present, and there is no life in the past pretending to be the present. Truth has to show up. So I'm going to adjust his language slightly because we're going to refer to the constructs of each person's mind as reality, and everybody's got one, and rarely are the two the same. And then there's actuality. There's what's actually going on in the creation. And we've spoken several times about the Harvard research that showed that in a time frame where 10,000 brain cells were firing, literally where there were 10,000 measurable units of electrical activity happening in the brain, literally hooked up to electrodes, and that in that same time frame where 10,000 brain cells were firing, only 9 bits of data came into awareness. 9 bits of data came into the actual, or to the reality of the mind, the construct of the mind, the perception that we have of an event. And it's been estimated that in that same time frame, which is about a 25th of a second, that there are perhaps 25 or 20 trillion bits of data in the actuality, what is actually going on compared to what we'll refer to as the 9-bit mind shows us. So back to Bohm. If we have a coherent approach to actuality, then actuality is going to respond coherently. In other words, you can't approach a field that is based in love with the incoherent energy of hostility and fear and expect to produce the result that you want. And that's exactly what Bohm says. Again, if we have a coherent approach to actuality, then actuality is going to respond coherently to us. We will produce the results we intend rather than the results that we don't intend. And how often out of the incoherent energetic patterns in our own minds do we feed into the actuality and draw to us things that are the opposite of what we want? It's our own doing. It's because we hold this incoherent energy, and life can only respond to what we give it. David Bohm went on in this particular lecture that I'm referring to. And again, just jump on YouTube and take a look at some of his interviews. He says there is tremendous resistance in admitting incoherence. Now let's look at a different word. The incoherence is a word of physics, a word of psychology, a rather modern term. But let's look at the ancient term for incoherent energy. Remember we talked about this body-mind unit, and the whole universe is energy. And relative to your body-mind unit or mine, there are basically two qualities of energy. There's that which builds the system up and that which tears the system down. Coherent and incoherent. Integrative and disintegrative. The term in the ancient Aramaic language for disintegrative energy is sin. Now, the Greeks have turned that into a big bugaboo thing to be terrified of, and oh boy, I'm a sinner. All the garbage that goes with that, all the incoherence that goes with that, when all the word means in Aramaic, it actually comes from the archery ranges. When you fired a bullseye and you missed the bullseye, the scorekeeper would yell, sin, off the mark. Incoherent, not consistent with the goal you had set to hit the bullseye. So, how many people resist admitting their sins, their incoherence, their hostility and fear-based energies, and wonder why, when they dabble only in hostility or fear, or primarily in hostility or fear, wondering why the universe that says, ask me and I will return to you what you asked for, wondering why the universe keeps bringing back hostility and fear. Each one has to admit their own incoherence. And David Bohm was saying this, back in the 30s. And he says the resistance to doing that is enormous. What is resistance? Let's tie that. This is physics we're talking about. We go back to the Aramaic, and Yeshua talks to Paul in that situation where he's attacking the high priest servant. And he says to Paul, get thee behind me, Satan. He personally calls Paul Satan. And then he says what he means by that. He says, for you think in the mind of man. You're in carbon-based memory, incoherence, rather than the plan of God, rather than tied into a coherent energy. Can we admit that to ourselves? Or do we believe our lying eyes? Because the minute we joined, and virtually every one of us, you and I included, joined the one world universal religion of blame, guilt, fault, and shame, by the time we were 4, we knew how to say, not me, they, my sister did it, my brother did it, my friend did it, somebody else did it, I didn't do it. If you became a member of that religion and admit it, you have been. I've never met anybody who wasn't. So when you do that, when you play the game, quote, here's what he said in his lecture, tremendous resistance to admitting incoherence. When people say everything's all right and there's an incoherent energy that needs to be dealt with, progress is destroyed. In other words, when you lie to yourself, you're out of harmony with truth, and you're not going to make it. You're not going to go forward to where you want to go. And then he adds a very profound piece. This is a physicist talking now, and the words echo right out of Yeshua's mouth from 2,000 years ago. He says, we need a period of emptiness. You got to stop your busyness. The number one incoherent energy, the number one drug of the planet, is busyness. Oh, I'm too busy to do that worksheet. I just want things to change, but I don't want to have to admit my incoherence. I don't want to own. I don't want to feel. I want to go directly to it. I want to use it to paint pictures of others. That's why whenever I'm in upset, I'm always talking about others and how they did it to me. That's called resistance. What is resistance in Aramaic? It's the name of Satan, literally. The Greeks turned it into this dude with the red suit, the tail, and pitchfork, but Satan is, in Aramaic, the resistor, one who misleads. And you watch the average person, when you invite them to own their own incoherence, what do? They hold their breath. They go into, no, not me, and then they tell you a story about somebody else. The fastest way I know to go into that quiet space that he's suggesting, that Yeshua suggested 2,000 years ago, is to recognize that forgiveness collapses whatever is moving in the mind. The mind only moves in response to goals. And when you forgive, when you cancel, remember in the Aramaic language, the word forgive is shabag. It literally translates to cancel. When you cancel a goal, the perceptual constructs of the mind that are being called forward by that goal, driven by that goal, collapse. And if you can take that moment to just take a breath, go inside. The still point breathing process is designed to deliver one to a true still point. Exactly what Bohm is saying here. We need a period of emptiness and quiet.
Someone is at the
We
front
need
door.
to shut the mind down and go into the closet and close the door. The deepest way, and the reason still point breathing is called still point breathing is because when you go into that still point, when the breath, not that the breath is being held, if you haven't experienced the still point process, get there and do it. But when the breath spontaneously stops, there is a period of suspension where there is high speed process and the mind is quiet. In quantum still point, next level to that, the mind is not just quiet, but the mind quits. What in the ancient teachings was called the mind of man, carbon-based memory. There's a point where that thing gives up, and that's what happens. That's what I'm understanding more and more as I'm doing quantum still point people work with people. Is the thing that holds the whole structure of insanity in place, what was identified as the mind of man, what David Bohm is calling the incoherent mind, is still. And that allows the energy of wholeness to enter. If the mind that holds the structure of the painful past in place lets go at that moment, and that's the objective in quantum still point, where the mind lets go, then coherence, being, the true active presence of love enters into this temple and transforms everything. Pardon me. Doesn't mean your work is finished. It means the mind has given up the structure it's holding for a moment. Now it comes back online pretty fast, but that's okay. From there on, it's just okay. I see there's another piece of work to be done. Yes, it is an entry point into the next level of doing one's own internal work. And that's what we're here to do. So, truth. You can't have healing without engaging truth. You got to give up your lies. That's what forgiveness does. But we each live, move, and have our being in an energy field called love. That's the truth of it. And if we engage in incoherent energies, we set up a field of destruction of our own tissue structure. The active presence of love integrates, fear and hostility disintegrates tissue. Literally, it is the source of all diseases. Now let's go back. I shared it yesterday, but so there's the Aramaic idea of it. Now let's listen to Max Planck. I shared this quote yesterday, but it fits so perfectly here again today in building the brain cells. So literally, we are moving through this field. Remember the ancients said, in him we live, move, have our being. We're not talking about a person here. We're talking about a field of love. And if we are moving through this field of love and we are surrendered to it, we are engaged to it, we are at union, or what David Bohm would call enfolded in it, then it runs our whole energy system and is an uplift. But if we engage in those incoherent energies, here's Max Planck, this is the father of quantum physics, explaining what that does. He says, in all my research, I have never come across matter. To me, the term matter implies a bundle of energy which is given form by an intelligent spirit. Well, we could edit that just a little bit and say, given form by an intelligent spirit or a carbon-based memory system filled with generations of incoherent, unresolved hostility and fear, and therefore a diseased system. But he's saying what we call matter, what we call your tissue structure, matter, is a bundle of energy that is held in place by what David Bohm describes as, or pardon me, as Max Planck in this case, describes as an intelligent spirit. And then he says, as a man who's devoted his whole life to the most clear-headed science, the study of matter, I can tell you, as a result of my research about atoms, this much. There is no matter. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particles of an atom to vibration and holds this most minute solar system of the atom together. You're made of the stuff called love. You're moving through a field called love. The only way you can have a disease process going on is if there is an incoherent energy in your system. So if we listen to this, here's Max Planck, who's literally considered to be the father of quantum physics. Here he's telling us that it is what you do with your mind. That's the force that brings together these particles of an atom. And if you have the particles of an atom formed in a way that's called the ABC disease or the XYZ disease, it's because you originated that with your mind energy, and that's what has pulled that atomic structure together. Now, somebody looks at the atomic structure and says, oh, that's the ABC disease. But you got to go to the truth. There is no matter. And it doesn't matter whether your disease is financial, emotional, relational, physical. It's all based in, are you in a coherent state connected to your created essence, which is love? Are you enfolded in that? And because there's no conflicting energy, any disease you have disappears? That's what makes for what's called miracle healing. So the natural state of the human is a physiological expression reflecting love. If there are generational patterns of incoherent energy, incoherent thought, then there are atoms drawn together that within that field of love have a stronger influence because that's how it's designed to work. You were given the power of creating. Remember yesterday we used the metaphor of Humpty Dumpty? What did he do? He sat on top of the whole creation with the ability to originate. And his mind fell from grace. And no broken mind, no matter how powerful in the world, could put him back together again. There's a work for each of us to do. And as Bohm says, it's tough for people to admit this incoherent energy that we hold, this quote unquote sin. So Paul says the fruit of the Spirit is love. Paul's talking about, this is the physics of it. This is the same language, or pardon me, different language, but the same basic thing they're trying to get through. When that energy, that higher energy in which we live, move, and have our being, which has been called the Spirit, we're moving through it, it is literally a field of love. However, if we have mind energy inherited from generations that include things like rage and abuse and fear, if I have no tools to get rid of that, how am I going to achieve this thing? And that's where Yeshua comes in with the tools. Here's how it's done. So the fruit of that aspect of our being running the show, rather than the incoherent energies running the show, is one, love, he says. And then it says joy. Yeah, in a world filled with generations of rage, abuse, and fear, peace. But with wars and violence all around, and people who rage continuously, perhaps brought up by people who rage continuously, perhaps sitting in front of the TV set terrified one day about someone who raged. The result of living in that space is he throws in here long suffering. It's like, well, I'm not so sure about that one, Paul. Thanks. I think I'll pass on taking the abuse. But gentleness, yes. That's a result of being connected there. If you're not in a space of love, in joy, in peace, in gentleness, guess what? You've got incoherent energy you need to own. And you need to use, if you want to change it, you've got to use the tools to do that. He goes on with his description of love that goodness, but in a world of war and theft and con jobs, racism, hatred, violence, faith. How many question, why does God allow this? Well, you know, when you realize that the Creator says, and you could almost imagine the moment where this conversation occurred between the Creator and the creation. At least I can imagine this. The Creator's, I've been in charge of all of life for all time. The bear does what I incline it to do. The inclinations I put into the robin and the raven, they follow. I've been in charge of all life until now. And I've raised up this human out of the dust of the earth. I've built from this atomic structure. I've placed in this being, this instrument called the body-mind unit, the energetic patterns of everything that has been learned through creation. And now I've created the ultimate form. And I'm going to give it something that I have given to no one else. What is that? Choice. The ability to sit on top of Humpty Dumpty's wall, to originate in the creation from the energetic patterns that we hold. And by the way, you're likely going to hear a little noise or two in a moment. I'm laying here with my grandson on my shoulder, and he's been sleeping on my shoulder for the last 2.5 hours, and he's just starting to wake up here. So, hey, Lincoln. Hey, Lincoln. He's actually been feeling a little under the weather, so he had a deep, deep nap. Yeah, you did, didn't you? Hey, hey there. Hey there, awesome boy. Yeah, here he is. So we're just going to give a moment. Hi, sweetie. And I'm going to hand you Jeannie, who's got a bottle ready for him. We're so blessed by this little guy. It's amazing. So when one says, why would God allow all of this? Well, if God put you on top of the wall and said, here, you now are the master of your own creation, I'm going to give you choice. I'm going to give you the ability to say where it goes from here. By the way, you're going to have to take responsibility for it. If you set it in a direction that's less than love, if there's an incoherent energy you engage in, you're going to have to be able to own it. It's one of the things David Bohm said it's the toughest thing for a human to do. Meekness, how's meekness been interpreted? Oh, go ahead and beat me. I'm worthless anyway. Or, how many have we heard of or seen? And there are cults still today. They have whips with, sharp pointed objects on the tip of the whip, and they beat themselves with it in order to suffer enough. How much insanity. And Paul adds in there temperance, which, one is not likely to head toward temperance if the enormous pain they're experiencing disappears with a fifth of scotch. It's going to take some time and some work to go in and clean up that mind. So Paul talks about these things as things that love does, but in fact, when one arrives at this space, there is no striving. It's not something that one does. It is literally something that one is. And so I'm going to invite you to just take a couple of deep breaths and close your eyes and get quiet for a moment. And I'm going to invite you to tap into and connect to the active presence of love. And as you breathe, allow that sensation of love to flood through every cell in your structure. And then for a moment, allow yourself to go to a space of sadness. Notice where in your physiology you're feeling and experiencing that sadness. Take your breath to that place in your physiology. Let it soften, let it open, and let it go. As you breathe into that space, allow yourself to feel fear. And notice where the experience of fear is in your physiology. You feel it in your hands, your neck, your face, your chest, your gut, your feet, your legs. Where do you feel it? And for a moment, take a breath to that sadness and let it soften, let it go. Take your breath to the fear and soften, let it go. And again, for just a moment, allow yourself to feel anger. It's interesting, those who live in projection, in denial and dissociation, anger is so easy for them. And anger is a drug they use. Interesting, Einstein had a pretty profound comment about anger. He said, anger exists only in the bosom of fools. It's such an incoherent and such a destructive energy that Einstein says you got to be a fool to engage in it. So allow yourself to feel that sensation of anger in your physiology if it's there. Take a breath, soften into it. Go back to that connectedness to love and bring it through the breath to the places in your physiology where there was sadness, fear, or anger. Now, with those fresh in awareness, dig out the list we started with when we started to do on the radio show the worksheet from the codependence workshop. Remember, you had a list of people who had offended you? Have you ever pointed any of these feelings that you just felt in your physiology at any of those people? And then I'm going to invite you, if you can see where one of those emotions showed up in relationship to a person in your life. Allow yourself in that specific circumstance involving that person with whatever their behavior was or is. What's the thought that you have to think in order to experience that emotion? and breathe. Let yourself become aware of those thoughts. And then look at column 2, your assessment of them. Column 1 was a list of everyone who's ever offended you. Column 2 was the nature of their offense. Take a look at the nature of the offenses you listed in column 2. Have you ever done any of those things to another person? Have you ever done any of those things to yourself? Now I'm going to invite you to consider that it's time to pick up the worksheets and work through those energetic patterns. Own your own incoherence. Stop the pretense that everybody that's on that list is the reason why you were upset with them. You were not upset for the reason your mind told you, like this one didn't do this or that one did that. You're upset because that nature of upset is in your physiology, literally organizing your tissue structure. What in that list do you need to stop, own, and work through? Are you ready to own that that is your incoherence? And it will be the very thing you blame someone else for. Allow yourself to breathe and recognize that's the next level of your work. If you don't ever work through your power person dynamics, then you will be allowing yourself to disappear your personal power into your brain's image of them and whoever can resonate those parts of your own mind. When you own that that's your own incoherence, then you can let go of the mind energy behind that, the thought disorder behind that incoherence, and literally evaporate it from your tissue structure. Literally evaporate that energy out of your cells. Remember, when you think a thought, what they've proven in the labs, the cellular biologist laboratory, is when you think a thought, that thought becomes a literal molecule in your body, a neuropeptide. And that neuropeptide circulates around in your structure until it finds a cell with a receptor site that matches, a cell that it's in resonance with, and that energy lands on the cell. If you were sitting inside the cell watching that neuropeptide, watching that thought land on the cell and insert itself in the cell, what you would see coming into the cell is what you call chemistry. Literally, mind energy becomes flesh. Thoughts, literally, a la David Bohm and Max Planck, an intelligent, or sometimes maybe not so intelligent spirit, brings an energy into the structure and literally organizes it, turns it into organic structure. Do you have any diseases that need to be dealt with? Then get on the forgiveness bandwagon and start to deconstruct. Learn the skill of pulling that neuropeptide back out of the cell, being able to look at it and read it for what it is and clean it up. Forgive it, remove it. And as you do that, you will regain your personal power. And what is personal power? That's the ability to be continuously aware of and function out of your highest guidance. If you're functioning out of something lower, then your personal power is gone. Why do people lose their personal power? Well, strictly speaking, you can't lose it. But what happens is, through denial and blame, we literally take our personal power, and we lock it into our brain's image of the people we're blaming. So that power is no longer available to us. There, when a person feels like I don't have any power and somebody else has got all the power, it's because they've locked their personal power through blame into their brain's image of those around them. Time to let go. If you tie your personal power up, if you waste it by giving, somebody else's behavior power over you, then you're probably locking back into a power person dynamic. That's where you want to dig out that power person worksheet. If you hold dis-ease energies and useless mental and emotional habits based in hostility or fear, defenses and patterns that drain you of your power, then it seems like there is no power available. And that person is run by what we call associative consciousness. What is that? Well, somebody says A, and that triggers B, and B triggers C, and C triggers D. And there is no choice, there is no interruption for someone who lives in that world of blame. It just goes from A to B to C to D automatically. It's just pure resonance. It's just an energetic function. So to free yourself from that associative consciousness is what forgiveness does. And your eye, when you go back and hear Yeshua saying the eye is the lamp of the soul, we're not talking about your physical eyeball. We're talking about perception here. Perception is designed to be the guide for your earthly life. But remember Yeshua talking, he says, if your perception, if your eye is darkened, i.e., if the guide you follow, if the light you follow, the perceptual construct you follow is based in hostility or fear, it's darkened, then he says how deep will your darkness becomes. What kind of behaviors will you do to dig yourself deeper and deeper into that darkness? So when he says the eye is the lamp of the soul, he's saying, and it's designed to be filled with light. If thy eye is single and filled with light, then your whole body will be filled with light. Your whole structure will function as it's designed to function. And you can't be guided when you're under stress and tension. You can't be guided to a behavior if hostility or fear is what is your guidance system. You've got to be able to reduce the stress and the tension in your structure. How do you do that? That's exactly what forgiveness does. Apply the forgiveness tool each time there's this flurry of noise coming from your mind, and that collapses. And when you breathe into it and it collapses, then you have the opportunity to change the thought disorders behind that state of non-being. But it's hard to do if your lights are out. It's hard to do if you're always rocking around in hostility and fear and grief and rage and pain. You remember when they asked Yeshua, what's most important law? He said, Rachma. He didn't say, love your neighbor, as the Greeks tell us. What he said was, have this filter in the frontal lobes of your brain that was called Rachma active. And if that is active, then a corresponding filter in the frontal lobes, in the back of your brain called Kuba will be active. And that will determine the quality of the goals that you engage in and the perceptual output of your mind. It's how to keep yourself on track. If we do not have the ability or even the awareness, and you recognize in the English language, there is no equivalent word for what Yeshua said was most important to human life. There is no equivalent word to Rachma. And there's a comment there. Let's see. So how does freeing from loss of power in mass consciousness, such as slavery, for example, occur? Oh, that's easy. Yeshua gave us the answer to that. when we reach critical mass. And when he said a little leavening leavens the whole loaf, he wasn't talking about bread. He was talking about human beings. Most who have human forms, there is no active human life in them. That's where things like the insanity of slavery and war and torture and the craziness that goes on. You know, bills coming from Congress that say, well, we're going to fund billionaires by cutting food stamps to hungry kids in states where we have only $5.25 an hour to $7.25 an hour minimum wage. That's what we're going to do. We're going to give those billionaires. That's the only way that can happen. Human life is gone. The restoration of human life, when enough people will do the work to bring back the active presence of love to their own physiology, the leavening that leavens a whole loaf. When enough. Now, it only takes a small amount of leavening to cause a whole loaf of bread to raise. It's going to take a few people who will do the true work of bringing the active presence of human life, love, to the earth and extend it to others doing the same to strengthen this field of active present love. However, if we need to survive with our power person, then what happens is, without Rahman Kuba, we build a profile based on the unresolved power person dynamics of the mental, physical, and emotional self we perceive we need to be to survive with our power person. And you don't want to be surviving with your power person. You want to literally dismantle, forgive the energetic dynamics so that those energetic patterns are no longer in you, radiating not only to your own cellular structure, but the movement of that energy. There's nothing we know of in the so-called physical universe that can stop the high energy wave that leaves in mind when we think a thought. If you live in a physiological system filled with hostility or fear, every hostility or fear that's moving in you is a vote for the kind of insanity that we're saying, well, that's impossible to resolve. Somebody has to get the guts. Somebody has to have the courage to step up and say, okay, I'm going to admit my own incoherence. I'm going to own it, and I'm going to forgive as to that incoherence and remove it and show up in the world as the leavening called active present love, no matter who I'm facing, no matter what I'm facing. It's a pretty high command, pretty high level of work. But those who are willing to do that piece of work are the leavening that will open the light and the option for sanity on a global scale. However, if you organize your self-image out of the power person dynamic, then compliance and doing whatever you did to survive with your power person will run the game. Whatever under stress, whatever the power person did that you disliked the most is what you will find yourself doing. If that's true for you, if you said, I'm never going to be like my, but here you are finding yourself 50 years later just like them, then you're going to have to do a giant amount of forgiveness work. Because until that is resolved under stress, you will do exactly what your power person did to you that you hated the most. And so recognizing and owning that and working through it becomes key to changing the game. And the reason we're here is to offer the possibility of changing the game, not just for you, not just for me, but for the whole of humanity. Are we willing to step up to the plate and say, yes, I'm going to own my own incoherence? And Carrie, thank you for that comment. Yes, most people are not aware of how incredibly powerful our thoughts are. That's one of the things, Carrie, if you weren't on yesterday, I was sharing some stuff from David Bohm. And one of the things that he offers is that thought has convinced us that it's doing nothing. Just, that it has no power. It's doing nothing. It's just reporting on the facts. When our thoughts are what are setting the whole game up. And that's where the reclamation of free will, and it takes literally going into that deepest space of silence and shutting the mind off.
You hit yourself in the head. Okay, let's put it back over here.
Critical mass is the key to it all. It's a necessity. So one must spend time looking at literally every thought disorder, especially the ones that we've denied, blamed somebody else for, and dissociated from. So when I deny and dissociate, when I say you made me, you're the one who are responsible for this, that shows up in my life over and over again, then I was dissociated from a part of my own mind. So that seems to be a place where life is uncontrollable. So here's a question for you. Invite everyone to just add this to your codependence worksheet or your codependence notes. When things become uncontrollable in relationships, what do you do? Over the years, I've watched people with answers like I go into a rage, I disappear, I try to control, I struggle. So what would be another option? What would being do? What would being do when things become uncontrollable in relationship? Well, there's a really powerful example. Yeshua comes out of the Garden of Gethsemane. I mean, this has got to be the ultimate codependent relationship, or at least potential codependent relationship. As Yeshua steps out and the high priest servant is getting ready to have him mercilessly slaughtered. Peter uses his sword to hack off or attempt to hack off the high priest servant's head. Fortunately, he just gets an ear. And Yeshua warns Peter, tells Peter he's playing out of Satan in himself. And he says, "For you're doing Satan, for you think in the mind of man rather than the plan of God. You're locked in to your own carbon-based memory." And then he turns to the high priest servant and does what a human being would do. Now, what would the average non-human mind do if they were Yeshua facing the high priest servant, knowing that he's going to have his body shredded by this guy? Would he finish the job with the sword? Well, that's what most people would do. But what does Yeshua do? He literally reaches out to the high priest servant and offers the archenemy healing. Imbues him with such a powerful presence of love that he repairs the severed ear. I've had people have said, well, Michael, I got that. I see that. That's an interesting interpretation. But did you notice that doing that got him dead? And I say, yes, I noticed doing that got him dead. Did you notice they couldn't keep him dead? Did you notice they couldn't keep him that way? Now, there's been a totally errant interpretation of that. See, suffering is the way. And people beat on themselves and beat on each other and promote, oh, offer up your suffering. Forgive me, folks. Pardon me. Forget that. Don't offer up your suffering. Heal. Own the incoherent energy in yourself and heal your suffering mind. Stop the denial and the blame that it's about somebody else. Because Yeshua came to show us the power of living as conscious, active, present love. And that's exactly what he did when he reached forward and healed the archenemy. And though they killed him, they couldn't keep him dead. That I offer is what he came to demonstrate, not the wonder and the beauty and the power of suffering that so many have reported. Those who don't know how to face and heal their own suffering make suffering some kind of a virtue. It is not a virtue. He did not come to show how virtuous suffering was. He came to show how powerful functioning as active present love was. So once again, if things become uncontrollable, what's your carbon-based memory done? Is it based in love? If not, then it's incoherent. Own the incoherence. And now, instead, what could I do? I could go into the silence. I could be tapping into the presence of love in myself and bring that forward through this hostility and fear-based mind of mine. Really? Hey, Lincoln. Hey, awesome boy. Hi there. I got this little guy right here beside me. And he's awesome. Hey, sweetie. Big-eyed, looking at what I'm doing here. So my offering is that what Yeshua did was come to show the power of living as conscious, active, present love. Now, I'm going to invite you to make a list. This is a homework assignment. List all the behaviors that your power person did that you disliked. And then, beside that, write the story of when you did those same behaviors. So make a list of all the... Now, you can go back. Remember in the power person worksheet we sent out in the newsletter? If you don't have a copy of it, you can go to our website and go down to the bottom. Well, actually, send Jeannie. Yeah, you can send Jeannie an email and ask her to send out the email to you that we sent out or to send the newsletter to you and put you on the newsletter. And that's got the 19-page Power Person worksheet on it and a link to I think it was 13 radio shows that we did on the Power Person. We'll be setting up and doing another link on this codependence workshop that we've been doing. I don't even know how many days we've been doing it now, but that'll be forthcoming. So make a list of the power person behaviors, the things that your power person did that you detested, and now own your incoherence if it's there. Which of those behaviors have you done? Now, I know your mind's giving you this story. Actually, what your mind has told you is you didn't really do what the power person did. You did something different. Like, if the power person did it to you, you said, yeah, they were just vicious and attacked me. If you did exactly the same thing, you would say, well, I was just trying to help them and support them. Remember, David Bohm said that, owning this incoherence is such a tough thing. Literally make a list of all the incoherent energetic patterns you've engaged in that your power person modeled for you. And then start doing worksheets and forgive that dynamic. And in the meantime, create the best year yet of your eternal life. Join us tomorrow again. Pass the show on if this is